She was left behind at the station. He buried love in dry dirt and rode without looking back. They didn't plan to meet, but the West don't care much for plans. Sometimes all it takes is one quiet moment between two broken souls, and a storm starts brewing. The wind didn't howl that morning. It whispered, dry, low, like a tired voice, slipping through brittle grass and fence wire. And Boone Ledger stood in it like a forgotten stone, hat pulled low, one hand resting on the wooden cross he'd hammered into the ground with shaking fists just hours earlier. It wasn't the first grave he'd dug, wasn't even the first for someone he loved, but it was the only one he couldn't cry over. Not yet. Because grief for Boone Ledger didn't come in tears. It came in salt on the rim of a whiskey glass. It came in the silence between footsteps. It came in the way his horse didn't nudge him like before. Even the animal knew something had shifted. Her name had been Evelyn. Soft voice. Hard bones. Stronger than the rails that ran out west. They'd ridden together through dust storms and rattlesnake country, shared beans by the fire and arguments under the stars. She once shot a coyote that got too close to their baby. Boone never loved her more than in that moment. Now the house was empty, the crib quiet, and the trail ahead stretched like a scar through sunburnt hills. Boone tied his saddlebags tight, checked the colt on his hip, and looked once more at the fresh dirt that covered her. "I'll come back," he muttered to no one. "When I ain't hollow." He swung into the saddle. The wind shifted, carrying smoke from a town 2 days' ride south, a place called Redstone Station. He hadn't planned on going there, but when life burns your map, you follow the smoke. It was evening when he arrived. The train hadn't come through yet, but the station platform held a shape. A woman in a brown travel dress, boots caked in dust, sitting like she'd been carved into that bench years ago. Boone slowed his horse, not from caution, but because something about her didn't move right. Not fear, not weakness, just waiting. Long waiting. The kind that made statues jealous. She didn't look up. Not when he passed, not when he dismounted. Only when he dropped his saddlebag onto the porch of the saloon did her eyes flick toward him, sharp, clear, tired. And in that look, Boone saw something he hadn't seen in months. Another soul still breathing. Just barely. And out there, where dust settles slower than regret and graves grow faster than crops, Boone Ledger took his first step, not toward love, not toward healing, but toward a woman who hadn't moved since the train left without her 3 weeks ago. The sun dipped low behind the church steeple and painted the station in amber light. The kind of light that made old wood look golden, and even pain seemed touched by something holy. Boone didn't mean to linger, but the woman stayed seated, still, quiet, not reading, not knitting, not even fidgeting with her gloves, just breathing. The slow, resigned kind of breath that only comes when a person's done hoping but hasn't stopped waiting. Boone hitched his horse by the post and leaned against the rail in front of the old mercantile. He watched the street, or pretended to, but truth was, he watched her. Like a man might watch a candle on its last inch of wax. She was maybe mid-40s, hair pinned back, dark from distance, streaked with silver when the wind shifted it just right. Her dress had the neatness of a woman raised by structure, but the wear of too many days on the same bench. That bench, Boone noticed, had a folded blanket on one end and a small satchel under her boots. A woman doesn't leave her things out like that unless she doesn't plan on going anywhere. After a while, she spoke. Not loudly. Not to him, really. "You ever lose a train and still hear it screaming through your nights?" Boone didn't answer at first. He let the wind fill the silence, like a tide creeping into a canyon. "Lost a few," he said finally. "Mostly people, sometimes chances." She nodded once, like his words weren't new to her ears. "I was supposed to go west," she said, "but he never got off. Guess he changed his mind." Boone stayed where he was. Didn't speak, but her voice kept unraveling, slow and steady, like a spool of thread tossed down a flight of stairs. "He wrote letters, promised we'd start new, promised I wouldn't be alone anymore. Bought me the ticket and said to wait here on the 15th train of the month." Boone did the math in his head. The tracks had seen 3 trains since. She turned toward him then, really looked, and Boone saw something behind her eyes that didn't quite match the voice. Not weakness. Something stronger than that. Something like grit that had run out of options. "My name's Clara." Clara Vance Boone touched the brim of his hat. Boone Ledger. Neither of them smiled, but there was a moment between them, a sliver of space that didn't ache. A pause in the morning. "And that's something, out west." He moved to the bench across from hers, about 10 feet off, sat down slow, boots scraping wood. The town was beginning to fold in on itself. Lights in windows, distant pans clanging, the creak of shutters. Night had started to settle like dust on an untouched table. Clara didn't ask where he came from. Boone didn't ask who'd left her behind. They just sat, like two folks stranded on opposite shores of the same silent river. Then, without looking at him, she asked, "You ever been left behind, Boone Ledger?" He didn't speak right. Away. His hand drifted to the Colt on his hip, not to touch it, but just to remember something. Maybe a promise. Maybe a failure. "I've been outlived," he said. Behind them, a dog barked. Somewhere far off, a harmonica played. The kind of song that didn't need words to break your heart. And as night fell around Redstone Station, Boone realized something that it took a man like him far too long to admit. This woman wasn't broken. She was weathered, like an old tree still standing long after the storm passed. And maybe, just maybe, he wasn't here to fix her. Maybe he was here so she could remind him what standing looked like. By morning, Boone had moved into the empty loft above the blacksmith's. Didn't ask for it, just tossed a coin on the counter and said he'd clean the place himself. The blacksmith, a barrel-chested Lakota man named Rickard Two-Tooth, nodded once and didn't ask questions. Folks in Redstone Station had long since stopped being curious about travelers. Clara was still at the bench. Not always sitting, sometimes she walked in slow, patient circles near the station fence. Sometimes she stood staring down the tracks, like she was trying to will steel into movement, but always there, always waiting. Boone watched her from the saloon porch, boots up on the rail, chewing the same piece of jerky since dawn. He didn't understand why she hadn't left, why she didn't scream, why she didn't look angry, just still. It made him uneasy, because folks that quiet either got nothing left inside, or they're holding back something big. That night they sat near the depot stove, a space shared in silence until Clara spoke without looking up. "You've got a widow's face, hard edges, empty eyes." Boone chuckled once, dry. "That supposed to scare me?" "No," she said, sipping her tea. "Just makes me wonder how much grief a man can carry before he turns into the one doing the leaving." Boone's jaw tightened. "I stayed. Buried her myself." "That mean you didn't run before?" "What about you, Clara?" he asked, still waiting for a man who's not coming. "No," she said. "I'm waiting to see what kind of woman I become when I stop." The stove crackled between them. Outside, a coyote howled, thin and lonely. Boone rose, brushed off his coat, and tipped his hat. "We all got ghosts," he said. "Some just sit quieter than others." She didn't answer. Didn't need to, because doubt had already settled in like cold air beneath a door, not just in Boone's mind, but in Clara's too. Were they meant to be crossing paths? Or just two broken wagons that stalled on the same road for a spell? He couldn't sleep that night. Boone lay on the cot in the loft, staring at the timber beams, counting the scars on the ceiling. His hand kept drifting to the revolver near his boots, not for fear of bandits, but for clarity. Clara's face kept flashing in his mind, not the stillness, but the watchfulness. The way she'd looked at him when she asked about running, like she knew something. And that got under his skin worse than prairie ticks. Was she really just a woman abandoned at a train station? Or was there more to her waiting? In the morning, Boone found her sitting on the bench again. He approached slow, boots loud on the boards. "The man who left you," he asked. "What was his name?" She looked up, smile slow and cool, like a shadow stretching at dusk. "You askin' because you care?" Boone paused. "Number, I'm askin' because this town don't forget faces. And nobody here remembers seeing him." Her smile didn't fade, but her eyes sharpened. "Then maybe he was never meant to be remembered." Boone nodded once, turned, walked. But the question stayed like grit in his teeth. And something about her, the satchel, the calmness, the way she never flinched, started to shift in his mind. Was she the one left behind? Or was she hiding from something? What do you think, folks sitting round this fire with me? If you were Boone, would you trust Clara? Comment 1 if you think she's just a woman with a broken heart. Comment 2 if you feel like there's something darker she ain't tellin' yet. Either way, you're gonna want to stay in the saddle for what's coming next. The sun had barely cleared the rim of Redstone Ridge when the mood of the town changed. It wasn't the light that shifted, it was the wind. A wind that carried dust and silence in equal measure. A wind that made shutters creak and dogs tuck tail beneath porches. Boone Ledger felt it before he heard anything. Then came the hoofbeats, not wild, not hurried, deliberate. 4 horses, well-ridden, well-fed, well-armed. Boone stepped off the saloon porch and narrowed his eyes at the trail beyond the water tower. The riders appeared like ghosts out of heat shimmer. 4 men in dusters, wide-brimmed hats pulled low, eyes scanning every inch of the town as they entered. One led the group, broad-shouldered, scar across his cheek like a red slash of truth. He wore iron on each hip, silver spurs that jingled not from pride, but from purpose. He didn't need to say a word. The street went still. Children pulled inside by their mamas. Store doors clicked shut. Even Rickard Two-Tooth at the smithy set down his hammer and crossed his arms. Only Boone and Clara remained visible, and she had stopped breathing. He saw it. The way her chest froze mid-inhale. The way her hands clutched the folds of her dress so tight they trembled. She knew that rider, and Boone knew she knew. The leader didn't dismount. He sat tall, face shadowed under his hat, and said in a voice low and dry, "You the one been keepin' her company?" Boone didn't answer right away. He moved slowly, stepping down off the boardwalk, hand resting near his Colt but not drawing. "That depends," he said. "You got business with her?" The man smiled, but it was a smile like frost, cold, pretty, and warning of something worse coming. "She ever tell you her name?" Boone glanced back at Clara, still seated, still silent, eyes fixed forward, as if this moment was something she'd already lived once before. The stranger finally dismounted, boots landing heavy in the dirt. He walked slow toward Boone, stopping just outside striking distance. "Name's Whit Ransom," he said. "I ain't here to cause trouble. I'm here to retrieve what's mine." Boone raised an eyebrow. "And what would that be?" Whit turned his head just slightly, his voice carrying louder now. "Clara?" Her name cut through the street like a whip crack. Boone stepped between them without thinking. His stance said ready, even if his gun stayed holstered. Clara stood then, slowly, deliberately. "Whit," she said, voice tight, "you're not welcome here." "I'm your husband, Clara." "Not anymore." "There was never no divorce," he snapped. "You just vanished, took money, took the wagon, left me to burn." She didn't flinch. "You were already on fire, Wit. I just stopped burning with you." Boone glanced between them. This wasn't just old lovers colliding. This was war, and it wasn't clear who the victim was, or who started it. "She tell you anything, Ledger?" Wit asked, eyes locked on Boone. "About who she really is? What she did before you rode in here thinking you're her savior?" Boone stayed silent. "Didn't think so," Wit hissed. "She's always been good at one thing, disappearing right before the truth catches up." Rickard Two-Tooth stepped closer. "This town don't tolerate bad blood spilling in public," he warned. Wit turned, slow and respectful. "Understood. I'll keep my hands clean, for now." He turned back to Clara. "You got one night. Tomorrow you ride with me. We finish this proper." He mounted his horse, reined it around, and rode off without another word. The other men followed. The silence that followed was worse than any gunfire. Boone looked at Clara. Her hands still trembled. "He lyin'?" he asked. She didn't answer, not directly. She just said, "The worst thing a man can be is partly right." Boone didn't sleep that night. He sat on the edge of the loft bed, the tin roof groaning above him, thinking about Wit's eyes, about Clara's silence, and about the weight of stepping into another man's storm without knowing where the lightning started. The West don't care about clean truths. But Boone Ledger did. And this time, he wasn't sure he was ready for the answers. Boone Ledger had seen plenty of showdowns. He'd seen men lie with sweat on their lips, die with prayers they didn't mean, and dig graves for the ones they once swore to protect. But he'd never seen anything quite like this. Two people who once shared a bed now stood like gunfighters, not over land or gold or cattle, but over the truth. And truth, out here, had a body count. Clara stepped forward, boots scraping the wooden planks, hands loose at her sides. "You want to tell your story, Wit?" she said. "Fine, but you tell it all, not just the parts that make you feel holy." Wit's jaw ticked. "You stole from me. You broke me." Her voice didn't rise, but it carried like thunder anyway. "You buried my sister in a canyon and never told me where. You drank till your fists forgot where my face ended. And when I left because it was the only way I was gonna live." The crowd didn't gasp. This was the West. We don't gasp out here. We just listen with our hands near steel. Boone watched Wit's eyes, and that's when he saw it. Not denial, but something worse. Shame, covered in bravado, draped in just enough righteousness to carry a gun in daylight. "You married me, Clara," Wit said, voice low. "You swore to stay." "I did," she replied, until staying became a slow kind of dying. The wind shifted. Boone looked at Rickard, who gave a nod like he'd heard enough. But Boone wasn't sure he had, because something still didn't fit. "If she ran, Wit, why'd you wait this long to come after her?" Wit turned to him. The charm dropped. "Because I didn't know where she went, and now I do." "So this is about revenge?" "No," Wit snapped. "This is about taking back what's mine." And that was the wrong thing to say. Clara flinched, not from fear, but from memory. And Boone Ledger, who'd never raised a hand to a woman but had killed a man who did, stepped between them without thinking. "She ain't property, Wit. She's my wife." "Not anymore." There it was. The challenge. The spark in the powder keg. Wit's hand drifted to his hip. Boone's didn't. He was already there. "Draw," Wit said. "Not here," Boone replied. He glanced at Clara. "This town's seen enough ghosts." They stepped out into the dust. Two men. One passed. The whole street held its breath. Even the horses looked away. The standoff was silent. The kind of silence where the world hangs on a heartbeat. And then, Wit flinched. Just enough. Boone drew. The shot rang out like thunder on dry bones. Wit dropped to his knees, Hand clutched to his thigh. Blood bloomed through his coat. He wouldn't die, but he wouldn't walk right again. Boone holstered slow. No swagger, no smirk, just the weight of another memory. Clara stepped beside him, looked down at her past. "You still think I belong to you?" she whispered. Whit said, "Nothing." In the West, sometimes truth comes in bullets, and sometimes the only way to escape the past is to put it in the ground where it can't follow. Whit Ransom lay sprawled in the dirt of Redstone's main street, blood darkening the thigh of his duster, hand twitching near a pistol he never had the chance to fire. And Boone Ledger just stood there, still, breathing heavy, but not fast, like a man who'd done what needed doing and was already regretting that it needed doing at all. The crowd had begun to thin. Redstone wasn't the kind of town that fed off spectacle. They'd seen blood before, more than most, and they'd learned early that justice was quieter than vengeance. Rickard Two-Tooth and another local hoisted Whit off the ground, dragging him toward the smithy's back room, where whiskey doubled as medicine. Boone didn't stop them. He just watched the dust settle. His hand, the one that had drawn steel, still shook slightly. Not from fear, but from something worse. Doubt. Clara didn't speak. Not right away. She stood on the depot steps, eyes not on Boone, not on Whit, but on the horizon, like she was listening for a sound that hadn't come yet. "It's done," Boone finally said, voice low. "He won't bother you again." She flinched ever so slightly. Then, after a pause, "It's not done, Boone." He turned slowly, brow furrowing. "What are you talking about?" She stepped down from the depot, boots kicking at dry pebbles, the weight of years in every step. "You think you know what you just did," she said, "but you don't." Boone narrowed his eyes. "I stood between you and a man who meant you harm." "Did he?" That stopped Boone cold. "Clara." She looked up at him now, not with tears, but something harder, something heavier than grief. "He never hit me, Boone, not once." Boone's mouth opened, but no words came out. "He wasn't a good man," she continued. "He drank too much. He spoke like thunder and loved like ice. But the bruises I told you about, I gave 'em to myself. The fear I described, half true, half made up." She exhaled, shaky. "I had to become someone else, Boone. I had to disappear in a way people wouldn't question. And I knew folks would protect a woman running from a monster." Boone staggered a step back like he'd been shot himself. "You lied." "I survived," she snapped, then caught herself. Softened. "No. I did lie. And I carried it longer than I should have. But you have to understand. It wasn't just him I was running from. It was me. The version of me I'd become with him." The silence between them now was thicker than blood. The kind of silence that don't break easy. Boone's jaw tensed. "Why now?" he asked. "Why tell me this after all we've been through?" Clara looked away, and then she said the words that changed everything. "Because when you stood in front of him with a gun, Boone, you didn't just protect me, you believed me, and I couldn't let that belief turn to poison in your soul." Didn't answer. Couldn't. His breath was shallow, hands still, eyes locked on the spot where Whit had fallen. Had he become what he hated? A man who judged fast, acted faster, and asked the hard questions too late? Clara turned away and walked to the depot bench. She sat, just like that first day. And for a long while, Boone didn't follow, didn't move. When he finally did, the bench was empty again. No note, no goodbye, just that same damn emptiness. Except, beneath the bench cushion, a gold ring in a small round tin. Inside the tin, ashes. Wrapped in cloth, a folded paper. Clara's handwriting, "My sister. What's left of her. I buried her and the truth together. But today you dug it up. Thank you." Boone stood there for a long while, staring down at ashes he didn't ask for, and a ring that never belonged to him. The wind picked up. A tumbleweed rolled past. The world kept turning like it didn't give a damn. But Boone Ledger gave a damn. And maybe that's what made him different. Clara lied. Wit bled. And Boone, he became the keeper of a truth he never wanted. In a land where honor's just a word until it costs you something. In the West, the only real compass is the one inside. And sometimes, it points you toward fire. Boone Ledger didn't speak for hours after Abe Fallon vanished into the dusk. He didn't chase, didn't curse, didn't even move at first. Just sat in the dirt, one hand on the blood-warm side of his injured horse, the other holding a cipher scrawled in a woman's handwriting he no longer trusted. The moon rose without him noticing, and by the time he stood, the wind had changed, colder now, less forgiving. He rode a limping gray mare borrowed from a trapper east of the ridge. No saddle, just a blanket. No plans, just direction. His ribs ached, his mouth bled, but what hurt most was knowing he'd believed in someone, in something, and maybe that belief had made him a fool. Again. He stopped at a shallow canyon near Dead Horse Crossing, made camp, small fire, no food. He sat beneath a crooked cottonwood, stars pricking the night above, and pulled from his coat something he hadn't touched in years. A worn, folded letter. Evelyn's handwriting, soft curves, ink faded, smelled faintly of lavender and ash. He unfolded it. Boone. If you're reading this, I probably didn't make it through the fever. You always said I was stronger than I looked. You were wrong. But maybe that's okay. Don't carry me around like a stone, love. You ain't a tomb. You're a man. And men like you don't stop riding. If the world gives you another chance, even one more trail, take it. And if she looks like trouble, that's how you'll know it's worth it. Eve Boone closed the letter slow. The fire snapped beside him, and for the first time in a long while, he let tears fall. Silent, private, earned. He thought of Clara, of Evelyn, of the girl in the locket, and of himself, this weathered husk of a man who kept trying to save things already broken. He whispered, I didn't save her, Eve. I just gave her room to run. The wind stirred the ashes. He tossed in the cipher, let it burn. Whatever secrets Clara had once kept. Boone didn't need 'em anymore. He didn't hate her, but he couldn't follow her either. The West was wide, and time only moved in one direction. In the morning, he saddled the gray mare and rode out without ceremony. No destination, no map, just motion. Somewhere along the trail, he passed a boy walking with a wheelbarrow, a sack of grain slung over his shoulder, dusty face, barefoot. The boy called out, Mister, you a ranger? Boone smiled faint. No, son, just a man trying to find a softer place to sleep. The boy grinned. Well, you look like you know where you're going. Boone tipped his hat. I don't. But I reckon that's never stopped me before. That's the truth of it. We don't always get closure in this life, but we get movement. We get to ride. We get to choose who we become next. Now let me ask you, partner, if you were Boone Ledger, would you? Comment 1. Ride back to Redstone and wait for Clara to return one day? Red Square. Comment 2. Keep riding west and leave the past behind for good. Let us know down below. And if this tale stirred something inside you, stick around. Hit that subscribe button to Cowboy Trail Stories. We've got more dust-kissed stories coming. The fire's still warm, and the trail ain't over yet. The desert sky was turning the color of old blood. Dust clung to the rim of the earth like a dying promise, and the last of the heat simmered off the rocks like ghosts rising from the dirt. Boone Ledger rode alone, not because he wanted to, because that's how it always ended, even when it started with good intentions. The ashes had been buried, the lies exposed, the woman gone. Now there was just the trail, and the sound of his horse's hooves, echoing like hollow regrets across the empty mesa. That's when he saw him. A lone rider, black against the dying sun, waiting at the crest of Dead Man's Spur. Still as stone, framed in crimson light. Boone slowed. One hand brushed his revolver. The other tugged the reins. "You looking to die at sundown, friend?" he called out. No answer. Not until Boone was close enough to see the eyes. Sharp, familiar, cold. "Hello, Ledger," said the man. Boone's breath caught. The name tore out like a thorn from old skin. Abe Fallon. They'd buried Abe in the hills near the Rio Bravo, or thought they had, shot 3 times and left for buzzards. But there he stood, 10 years older, not a ghost, not quite a man either. His duster was sun-faded, patched at the shoulders. His boots were worn, but firm in the stirrups, and his Colt sat high and clean on his hip, the way killers wore it. Boone's voice was gravel now. "How the hell?" "Guess the devil wasn't done with me," Abe said, smiling thin. They dismounted slowly. Neither trusted the other. Both knew too well what hands like theirs could do in a heartbeat. Boone tilted his head. "You following me?" "Heard about the shootin' in Redstone. Heard Ledger's back on the gun." Boone clenched his jaw. "I ain't that man no more." Abe nodded toward the tin holster on Boone's side. "Could have fooled me." Then Abe dropped the smile. "Clara's sister, the one you buried. What about her?" "She wasn't just someone's kin. She ran messages for the Confederates after the war ended." Boone's eyes narrowed. "That don't make her guilty." "Number, but it makes her dangerous. She was part of the Ashen Network. Traitors, smugglers, shadows wearing nice boots." "You got proof?" Abe tossed him a leather pouch, cracked, stiff with age. Inside, a folded cipher, Confederate script, stained with blood, and in the margin, a name Boone had never heard before, but he recognized the handwriting. Clara's. "That's her real name," Abe said flatly. "She changed it 3 towns ago. You think you saved her, Ledger, but maybe she was playing all of us. Why come now? Why not sooner?" Abe looked to the horizon, then back at Boone. "Because I owe you a bullet." Boone barely had time to move. Abe drew, but the shot wasn't for him. It hit Boone's horse square in the flank. The beast reared in agony, pitching Boone sideways into the dirt. His head cracked against rock. The world spun. Gun out of reach. Ears ringing. By the time he crawled up on his elbow, Abe was already riding. A dark figure swallowed by dusk. Hooves pounding like war drums into the distance. Boone didn't chase. Couldn't. His body screamed. His mind raced, not just with pain, but with questions. The name on the cipher. The lies Clara never confessed. The truth about the woman in the tin. Had Boone become a pawn? A protector? Or just a fool too full of honor for a world that didn't deserve it? He sat in the dust as night crept in, broken horse beside him, stars beginning to scratch the sky. He pulled the cipher from the pouch, stared at Clara's real name. It burned like a brand. Who was she? And what war had he stumbled into? In the West, trails ain't just roads. They're stories. And sometimes, the one you ride leads right back to hell. Boone Ledger didn't ride fast on the way back to Redstone. There was no reason to. The wind had already taken what needed taking. The fire had already burned what it had to burn. Now came the ashes. And maybe, just maybe, something new could grow from them. The town hadn't changed much. Rickard Two-Tooth still hammered steel in the forge. Mrs. Fallon still scolded chickens like they owed her rent. And the depot bench still sat quiet under the awning. But something felt different. Not in the town. In Boone. He walked into the saloon just after noon. Ordered water, sat in the corner, listened. Didn't take long before he heard it. The kind of talk that always finds ears when you stop listening so hard. Some say she's in Santa Fe now. Gray streak in her hair, runs a schoolhouse out of an old church. teaches orphans how to read, and keeps a pistol in the drawer under her Bible. Boone didn't turn, didn't smile, just nodded to himself, slow. If it was true, it was enough. Later that afternoon, a boy rode in on a shaggy Mustang, mail satchel slung over his shoulder, boots 2 sizes too big. He walked right up to Boone in the street. "You Boone Ledger?" "That's what it says on the gravestone they'll carve for me." The boy grinned, handed him a folded piece of paper. "Lady said you might need this someday." Boone opened it. Clara's handwriting. "Boone, I don't know where I'll be when you read this. Maybe Santa Fe. Maybe not. I didn't deserve the grace you gave me, but I won't waste it. Not again. You were the first man who stood for me without owning me. That matters. You matter. I hope you ride on. I hope you don't stop. Because the trail's still long, and you've got stories left to live." Clara Boone folded the letter with quiet hands. No tears, no speeches, just a long, steady breath. Like he'd set something down he'd been carrying for too long. At sundown, he saddled up, tied a small wooden cross to the side of his saddle, whittled from the branch of the cottonwood he'd buried the ashes under. Not for show, not for God, just to remember. Not her, not Evelyn, not Clara, but the weight of truth, and how it can make or break a man. He turned once at the edge of town. No one waved, no one called out, but that was fine. Boone Ledger wasn't riding for applause. He was riding because that's what he did, and now he could ride without ghosts. Life lessons from Boone's Trail 1. Not every truth will save you, but lying will always cost you more. Boone once watched a young deputy lie to protect his sheriff. 2 weeks later, that lie got 3 men buried under a sycamore tree. Truth's slow, but it catches up. 2. Sometimes the person you save ain't the one who needed saving. A drifter once begged Boone for water. Boone gave it. The man stole his horse. But a week later, Boone found a starving dog tied to a post. Saved that one. Instead, said it mattered more. 3. A man's worth ain't in his aim. It's in what he chooses not to shoot. Boone stared down a kid once, shaking hands, too young to die. He let him go. Years later, that kid came back, wearing a badge. One last question for you, cowboy. If this story found a place in your bones, tell me, what kind of tale do you want to hear next from Cowboy Trail Stories? A high-stakes standoff between twin brothers on opposite sides of the law? A haunted preacher who lost his faith but still carries a 6-shooter? Drop your vote in the comments. And if you ain't done riding yet, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next tale around the fire. There's always another trail, and there's always room here, just for you.